Hard to imagine Scott Frost being back next season. Let's assume the interest would be mutual. I guess that means mutually parting ways. What would the next 5 seasons look like if Urban Meyer was their head coach?
Started here. Let's go. Start the push.
A lot of press, a lot of columns about how terrible it is that Nebraska's doing it. And then they would probably start winning games. I don't know. Like, if you look at what Urban has done in his career since leaving Utah when he left for Florida, like he came back to coach at Ohio State, which is a program you can win a national title at. The question at this point is, do you look at Nebraska and think that's a place I can win a national title? I think that's the bigger question facing Nebraska right now than, who you get to replace Scott Frost. I think there's something of an identity crisis going on with that program because it is a program that has had history of competing for national titles, but is that going to be the reality in this new era? And does it still have that kind of cachet? Would Urban Meyer I don't have any doubts that Urban would be able to recruit because he's Urban Meyer, but would he be able to recruit at the level he was able to do at Ohio State, that he was able to do at Florida? Would he be able to convince kids to come to Nebraska and play there, with Nebraska being as lackluster as it's been? Because if you think about the kids he'd be recruiting if he took over the job next year, like those entire kids' cognizant lives of maybe paying attention to college football, Nebraska has not been good. So I don't think it would be just an immediate Urban Meyer steps in and Nebraska's good again, but I think they'd probably be better than they are now. It's just, is that enough for Urban? I doubt it.
There's no way he's taking this job.
No
way.
I'm not ruling it out.
So I think Urban Meyer's at a place where he still has enough cachet, even with the disaster that was Jacksonville in the NFL. He's not going to take a job unless he knows he has an edge, which is a place where you can have more talent than the other teams. And I think that was the case at Utah when they were still in the Mountain West. I think he knew he could gain that edge going to Florida. And I think he had that edge. He walked into a great situation at Ohio State. It's more of a rebuild. And that's why I do think like the Texas stuff always comes up. I do think that would be attractive because I think he would view that as a place where, yeah, we're Texas. We can get anybody we want. I do think it's a unique aspect to Nebraska because they have such a great fan base. They would shell out money that in this new NIL era, maybe you could buy your way back to relevance, buy some of those recruits. But I just don't know, especially now that USC and Miami are back in the game and Texas, like there's a lot more, no offense to Nebraska fans, but there's a lot more desirable places to play where you're probably going to win faster and it'll be a little bit easier and you can make just as much money, if not more. I think that's just a job that Urban Meyer would say, no, I'm above that, which is kind of crazy, but I do think he would pass on it.
I also think a key part of where Urban goes next, if he returns to a college program at any point, is that the bars on campus will have to have a strict no phones policy. You got to leave them at the door.
See, I was going to say Nebraska's the kind of insular community where they might be able to, keep the trust tree right there and be able to, get everybody on the outside and be able to keep things from getting out. I think that the NIL era, I think that the transfer portal era could inspire Urban Meyer to look at Nebraska and say that is a place where I can win a national championship. I think that Urban Meyer can look at what Lincoln Riley has done to flip a USC roster in 1 year, and he can think, I can go and do that if I can mobilize this. I mean, if the Nebraska fan base, if the Nebraska boosters get that whiff of national championship that Urban Meyer brings with his 3 national championships, I think that they would mobilize. Would Urban Meyer take it? I do not claim to have any personal relationship with Urban Meyer or understanding of where his head's at, but I would say that Urban Meyer can win a national championship at Nebraska if he wanted to take that job. And it is because of the transfer portal and the NIL era and the example of what we saw from, and look, Lincoln might not even win big. I mean, that team could go 8-4 and end up in the Alamo Bowl playing against Oklahoma. But I think that Urban Meyer could say, look, I could take over Nebraska, and in 1-2 years, we could have the kind of talent to compete for a Big Ten title. I think it could work.
Here's why it wouldn't, and this is why Lincoln Riley took the USC job. The state of California, the West Coast, had been pilfered by the SEC, by Clemson, by the powerhouses across college football. Lincoln Riley knew there was a void that was just begging somebody to step in and say, hey, you can stay at home. So he stepped into it. Mario leaves Oregon. Because Oregon, you have all those resources, all of those resources. You've got the deepest pockets out there in Phil Knight. And I guarantee you, Phil Knight told Mario Cristobal, I'll give you whatever you want. Whatever. He is desperate for a national championship. Phil Knight wants one for Oregon before his time is up, which is, he's in his 80s. And Mario said, I got a guy in Miami and I got a lot more talent in my state. I can go down there. I think that's a challenge for Nebraska that they're going to face no matter who they're trying to lure to get there.
And that's the other thing, too, if you're Urban, you got to consider is, like Chip, you mentioned how quickly Lincoln was able to flip things around at USC. Well, yeah, it's much easier to convince kids to go to Southern California than it will be to Nebraska. And I say that as somebody who likes Lincoln, Nebraska. But the other thing you have to consider is at Nebraska, you've not only got to go through Ohio State, but you're going to have to go through Lincoln Riley's USC here pretty soon as well. So I don't know that a national title is truly going to be a realistic goal, even with Urban Meyer at Nebraska anytime soon.
You know what they did? They brought back the wrong former player. They should have gone and got Tommy Frazier and brought back the triple option to Lincoln and said, let's bring back the glory days. There's your blueprint. I'm surprised, Tom, you're not pounding the table with me because I know you're dying for another Power 5 team to bring back the triple option. I mean, who better would it be than Nebraska?
I would love it. I would love it. I don't think you're going to be able to sell it to Nebraska right now, but I do think, again, that is something that a lot of teams need to start considering because it's the sport is cyclical. Zig when everybody else zags, and that is definitely a zig.
Good question from John in the chat.